and welcome to the April 4th, 2024 Washington County Board of Commissioners Roundtable. We have a very full day today, but the first part of our day will be a special emergency response tabletop exercise. And thank you, John Wheeler, for putting this together for us. This is part of a series of information and other sessions that the board has asked for and been through to improve our knowledge and learning more about the organization's preparedness for different major emergencies. We've been through a lot over these last 4 or 5 years, and we and the organization have learned over the course of time and made improvements, but this is an opportunity for us as a board to really help cement that for ourselves so that it's more rote the next time something untoward occurs. So at this juncture, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Harrington, and thank you very much for this opportunity, Chair Harrington and board members. For the record, I'm John Wheeler, manager of Washington County Emergency Management. Getting into our order of ceremonies today, as Chair Harrington just mentioned, what we are doing today is what I would call a capstone on a year-plus effort to help improve the board's awareness, knowledge, skills, and abilities for preparing for, responding to, and recovering from large-scale emergencies and disasters. So the aspects of that process that we've been through, that path that we've been down over the past year or so, is up on the screen here. We have been working to improve the board's general preparedness through providing binders, contact information, the elected officials emergency operations guide. There's still some work in progress in regard to that. We did an initial work session on February 28th last year, providing a general overview and orientation to emergency management in Washington County, talking about the emergency management system in Washington County, in the state, and in the region. We did an orientation to board emergency operations in May, and I would call that orientation the didactic version of what we're going to talk about today, which is the board's role in emergencies. And then in September, we did Adrian Donner and I did a session for the board, a work session to talk about how we do orientation, outreach, and education to the community to help improve community preparedness and resilience. So again, that brings us today where we're going to do a tabletop exercise. So general agenda today is I'll give an exercise overview. We'll talk about what these exercises are all about, how they fit into our preparedness plan. And we'll get right into it. I will present a scenario. We will use our imaginations. And we will have 3 different modules to this exercise. First one will deal with the incident onset, about the first 24, 48 hours of a substantial emergency. Module 2 is going to be more internally focused, where we're going to talk about and focus on employee health and safety and continuity of operations. That is going to be a progression of the scenario, so we'll still have an opportunity to talk about where we're at with the incident and how the incident response and community response activities are taking place. And then module 3 is going to focus on community support and preparing for recovery. Something we didn't focus on a whole lot in the May presentation, but that I'd like to spend a little time on today in our walkthrough today. And then we'll do a wrap up there.
If I could add, I asked Diane Taniguchi-Dennis, our CEO, to make sure that Clean Water Services was here, since we also serve as the board of directors for that premier utility. And we know that all of these incidents that the county goes through, the utility also goes through. So if we make note of anything that would help us with regard to that utility, Jack will capture that for us, or if we have any questions.
Great, thank you. Good to have
Again.
you, Jack.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. So the quick overview of the exercise, our purpose today is to validate the board's understanding of your roles and responsibilities in a disaster and identify any remaining knowledge gaps or other issues that we identify today. The scope of this is, of course, this is not going to be a real-time activity. This is really, I would call it a walkthrough. It's a chance for us to sort of play cards with our hands face up, so to speak. What we had with when we talked about this in May was more of a didactic and academic discussion of the board's role in emergency operations. This is our opportunity to do something that still is notional, but is going to be focused on how we would react to a fairly specific scenario that I'll present today. The focus is on clarification of roles, responsibilities, and expectations. We don't have too much of an opportunity in this environment to get down to super tactical details, but that's consistently, again, with the board's roles in most situations. And this is really meant to be a low stress and collaborative working environment today. Yeah, we're all in this. Yeah.
Not a test.
Team effort, yeah. We're not going to put anybody on the spot. We'll work together here today. And we have some expertise in the room to help us answer any questions that may arise. So,
John, you've been our emergency management manager here in Washington County for 5-6 years at least.
yeah, 5 years, 2019.
Okay. In my prior elected capacity as Metro Counselor, I was one of the founding members of the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization. And I can't remember at what time, but we had, as part of that, a couple of different guest speakers at different meetings. And one of them was the county chair, county commissioner in Napa County, California, where we had invited her to come up and speak to us about their most recent earthquake experience. Well, it just so happened it was after the wildfire that they experienced. Now, I believe you were with Vancouver, or was it Clark County?
Yeah, Clark County.
Were you part of that, the whole RDPO work groups, and did you attend that meeting by any chance?
That's a good question. I'll be honest, I did not attend all the policy committee meetings.
Okay.
Not have been there. I do have a rough inkling. I know there was a lot of discussion and some sharing that Napa, California jurisdictions did.
Well, I learned a lot. We had dinner together, a few of us, at the time, RDPO chair Tony Hyde, in Vernonia and Columbia County. He was and still is, well, as an elected official, he was one of the most experienced natural disaster commissioners. And so I joined him, as well as the RDPO management, in having dinner with this commissioner, and then the meeting the next day in the forum. Learned a lot about how involved the things that the commission had to do in order to support the organization in each of those events, and some of the uniquenesses that came up. So I may have some questions later on about what about, and some of them I have shared with Ms. Angie, wondering, as we've gone through different things, how do we make sure essentially the employees are taken care of?
Can I ask a quick question? As the RDPO rep now, has there been that type of presentation in the last few years? And the reason I'm asking is I'd like to maybe request that. So if you could just, we don't have to answer it. This meeting's not about RDPO, but yeah, if we can just talk about that, John, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, the RDPO has had over the years, different presenters, workshops happen where we've learned from other communities, bad disaster experiences, but that's good feedback. I can take that back to Mark Furtick, the executive director there. Yeah.
And I know that Commissioner Scouten was the member then, but I don't know how he brought that information back to the Board of Commissioners. Similarly, in our formation, with him, our first couple of years, him being that rep, we didn't hear much about it. Thank you.
We are going to use a wildfire scenario today. Wildfires are of course, a growing concern now increasingly on the west side of the Cascades. And so also we have wildfire season coming up here in a little while, so it's timely in that regard. And wildfire scenarios also present really a good scenario to demonstrate the capabilities that we have in the county. They're fast acting, so they work really well for a tabletop type of scenario like this. So that's the plan. Just a quick overview. I did want to sort of touch on some highlights. I know that we've shared with you all an update draft of the elected officials emergency operations guide. Worked on that actually. That turned into somewhat of a project, and then we did a couple of substantial updates to that to make it easier to read and refer to. And we also added some public health authorities to it.
I thought that was after or before this.
It's after the previous edition. So there's just a March. There's a March edition.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, and I have an
I thought
extra
it
copy
was
here
not.
if anybody.
well, it needs to be printed without the rev marks, wasted space.
Okay. So, and that will be, that though is a good, valuable reference document for these discussions here today. In terms of overviewing the county, the board's emergency response role and how the county would respond to an incident. Of course, when we respond to an incident, we are basically applying the county's emergency operations plan, and we're also applying what's called the National Incident Management System. The National Incident Management System basically provides the standards of incident management, resource management, incident organization, and that kind of thing that we and all of our partners really must use in order to have an interoperable and integrated response to an incident. Our emergency operations plan then identifies how we're going to carry out certain functions, and specifically in the county, how we do mass care, shelter, transportation, communications, that kind of thing. So when we respond to an incident, those are sort of our two guide marks: our emergency operations plan and then the training, orientation, and experience we've had with the National Incident Management System. As we discussed in the May work session, the baseline roles of the board, we've categorized into three parts, which is there's setting policy to enable the emergency response, to address any critical policy issues or roadblocks that we have, and do other things like that to enable response and recovery. Issuing emergency declarations, which is really sort of a part of setting policy. And then public communications, amplifying, supporting messages related to how the public can protect themselves, how they can protect themselves and their families, how they can get assistance, and other issues like that.
Ms. Angie, the guide that we were provided here is not marked draft, and I understand there are some improvements from March. My question is, can you let us know at some point when during the year we'll have a final update?
Yep.
That would be good. It's very small.
This one is marked draft at the bottom.
This one is not marked draft.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out what
I
we're
was
talking about.
pointing to this.
I'm just trying to figure out. Okay, thank
This
you.
one is not marked draft.
Okay,
Dated February 2021.
okay, thank you.
This refers to a draft.
Okay.
We need to be told when we're going to get a final
Yes.
version.
Digging more into the roles of the board, just overall, aside from those baseline roles, elected officials, of course, play an important role in disasters. And we can see that in the media, on TV and elsewhere every time we have a substantial incident somewhere in the country, such as what we're seeing now with Baltimore bridge collapse. So elected officials, of course, again, set policy and priorities that enable fast, efficient, and equitable response. They can play a role in instilling confidence that government institutions still function and the county's values and priorities are reflected in response and recovery. They can coordinate with other elected officials, advocate for assistance, policy changes at regional, state, and federal levels as well. They can also serve as liaison to community leaders, business leaders, and others. I know that's something that I've experienced, through the board, as you have had contact with and outreach from your constituents, from businesses, and others, and that sometimes has been an important avenue for us to get information about the status of those entities. But you can also support their restoration and recovery as well. And last but not least, you can serve as a voice of the community and foster community solidarity and resilience. Washington County strong, maybe the saying that we have at some point in the future.
And that's where I would like to suggest a wording change. It's voice of and to the community. One of the things that we experienced and had to wrestle our own organization to deal with during COVID was community members with the onset of the virus were not just impressed with job titles. And so that's where it was important that we played a role in communicating to the community that we had trusted sources from the organization who we put our trust in to help us through this. And that was quite a wrestling, because I'll just say it again, I've said it before, we were pushed aside. And I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to future boards. So that's why, to me, it's important that this last bullet talk about being a voice to and of, because we are part of it. Just because we don't have PIO titles doesn't make us non-entities. It was also very galling to me that we had adopted the equity resolution, and one of the first things that the emergency management team wanted to do was define equity and move on that. And I happened along it when we took a tour of the command center, and I put my foot down. And I said, wait a minute, we have a board approved definition where we went through community work. So it was a really tough experience at the beginning. And subsequent to that, the team did a stellar job. And it was a long experience of years. So it was really exemplary. But I want to make sure that future boards don't have that rough experience, because obviously it has stayed with me.
Yeah. Point well taken. And yes, voice of and to the community, I think is valuable. Obviously, our community communications is going to be critical. We want to do that through all the pathways, not just technical subject matter expert pathway, but community leader and elected officials pathways.
And the team does a great job in keeping the board up to date and making sure we know that there are official positions for the official voice, but we help make that initial bridge that these really are. These may be brand new faces, brand new names, and brand new titles, but these are the trusted people that will help you get through this.
instilling confidence in government. So, great. So a few notes on exercise guidelines. So each, again, we're going to do this in 3 modules. Each module will start with a presentation of the scenario details, and then if you had a chance to review in advance, you saw there was basically one slide to facilitate the Q&A and the discussion. Really pretty straightforward, asking you about your roles, your priorities, your needs for information, and that kind of thing. One thing I want to mention is, as you noticed, perhaps there is subject matter expertise available in the room from Clean Water Services, from leadership within the county, Brad and Tanya, and others. I did want to mention, since we're dealing with a wildfire scenario, I did invite some fire defense board representatives in the room to, if you don't mind me putting you guys on the spot, but Kelly Zakruski, hopefully I got your last name right, Battalion Chief with the Hillsborough Fire Department, and Alan Fitzpatrick over there, the Oregon State Fire Marshal Regional Response Coordinator. All right, nailed it. There.
I know that folks who live with, even in the city limits of Forest Grove, tend to have heightened awareness during the dry season because of their closer proximity to forests than, say, where I live in Beaverton. So it's pretty amazing what our fire districts do to help reinforce preparedness and awareness. It's really great.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of capability here. It's sort of, I think, an important point to make on this scenarios. We're certainly not saying anything about any concerns about specific hazard areas or capability limitations that we have. We're mostly trying to create a scenario that will drive a discussion here. So, again, this is an open, no-fault environment. Scenario is meant to support a focused discussion, again, beyond an academic or didactic discussion that we've had before. Treat the scenario as plausible. Decisions also don't necessarily have to be precedent setting. We can raise issues here, and they don't have to be the final word on it. We can identify issues for discussion offline and follow up as well. Any questions about that format before we dive into scenario? The other thing I'll mention for a guideline is just, again, it's a fairly informal discussion, and we'll have together. I'll sort of play 2 roles just to be aware of it, which is number 1. And as we've already shown here this morning, is I'll facilitate the exercise and the scenario presentation and discussion. I'll also play, of course, the role of the emergency manager, and so may have sort of injects or things to say in regard to how I would respond or how I might react to different aspects. Right. Just to make you aware of that. So imagine, if you will, it's Tuesday, September 10th. The past few months have been busy, starting mid-August. So starting in mid-August, the West Coast started to experience a very active wildfire season. There were major wildfires in Oregon, including the Willamette Valley. There were frequent air quality advisories issued for the metro region due to wildfire smoke, classified using EPA standards as unhealthy and very unhealthy. On the bookends to that, there's unhealthy for vulnerable populations, or susceptible populations. And then on the upper end, there are hazardous air conditions, which is generally the highest level, the greatest level of concern. That's what we saw following the Labor Day wildfires in 2020. The healthcare system is strained. Firefighting and mass care resources are limited. Due to forecasts of strong east winds and dry conditions, very common for us to experience that late August and September as the seasons sort of start their change. But due to those forecasts, PGE has initiated a proactive power shutoff, or a PSPS, or public safety power shutoff, in their service, again, for their whole service area. They have 4 zones in Washington County that are subject to these power shutoffs. In our scenario, they're going to activate all of those. 20,000 customers then will have their power deliberately turned off, or had their power deliberately turned off, starting yesterday, at 4 p.m.
For Forest Grove Power and Light, they get their power from Bonneville. So if PGE is, so PGE doesn't cover Forest Grove.
Yeah.
But might there be in this scenario a similar thing happening with Forest Grove?
Forest Grove is not in a PSPS zone. So,
Oh,
yeah, so PGE, the way this is done is PGE does a very detailed analysis of where their high hazard areas are.
yeah,
And that's how they determine where their public safety power shutoff zones are.
yeah.
Based on obviously where you have dense vegetation that's intersecting with where their power lines are.
So here's another reason why I was asking. I don't recall, so Barney Reservoir is open. Obviously, the Tualatin River is open, but the JWC processing basins are exposed at the top, I believe. I haven't toured the new ones. And then the basins, some of the basins, treatment basins at the different sanitary sewer are open. And I don't recall, my brain hasn't retained what happens with things like ash, though I know we've had ash in the past. I just remember when there was that algal bloom decades ago that JWC had to use carbon, and that got really gunky with the filters. So I was thinking about, okay, some of the complication may be Barney's affected, right? Well, Hag too. Then will the processing get gunky on either end, either for drinking water or sewage treatment? So this is imagination gone wild.
That's not unfair, obviously, at all, because there are substantial aspects of the drinking water delivery system that are in wildfire-prone areas, slow sand filters, Egg Lake, Tualatin River, and places like that. You'll recall that last year there was a fire in the Bull Run watershed, and that led to a very aggressive response by Portland Water Bureau, working with the fire agencies, state agencies, to do really very extraordinary measures to with contingency plans in place and what that would have impacted some of the water supply in Washington County. So not something we specifically worked into that scenario, but that's a good thing to keep in mind, is that when we have wildfires, particularly in our watersheds, that can lead to some pretty serious concerns there.
When you talk about mass care resources limited, I remember back with that Labor Day fire business in 2020, in the Clackamas County population being put on alert that hotels in Washington County were filling up with folks. And so when you talk about mass care resources limited, Jane Q Public here, I'm not really sure what that means on the board, so to speak, on the playing board.
Sure. So putting my emergency manager hat on here, what I'll tell you is that what this means is that the Red Cross, who is our go-to and is an amazing resource provider capability for our sheltering. And I somewhat based this, you can sort of tell already, this is a little bit based on the Labor Day 2020 wildfires, except for a little bit more challenging for us. But in that Labor Day wildfires, we had pretty severe limits on what the Red Cross could do.
It was during COVID time then too.
Yeah, because they were deployed to other wildfires in California in Oregon.
And that's when we took the tour. The three of us were on that tour, I believe.
Which tour?
of wildfires. Remember when we went up?
Oh,
Well,
with
for the-
TBF&R after, yeah,
Yeah.
a couple weeks later, but I'm remembering what he's talking about. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I'm just trying to put all this together in my mind. I think that was that time frame.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that Labor Day wildfires, again, the Red Cross is a very much a volunteer-driven organization. A lot of their volunteers were deployed, so this is not an unrealistic scenario or assumption that if we have large-scale wildfires across the West,
What I recall back then too, with regard to this mass care, was that the hotel constraints, but also things like due to the COVID complication, right? September 2020, right? Still very much isolate the protocols. We didn't have the vaccines yet. The idea of opening up school gymnasiums for people to be temporarily housed, then there were all kinds of folks willing to provide donations, and that was very complicated too. So
That was also
it's amazing you all got through that. And do we ever allow you to take your emergency management hat off?
like facilitator versus,
Oh, okay, got it.
no, it's all.
Is there more to this scenario? And the reason I'm asking, because I was going to ask about what happened during the 2020 with the animals and the fairgrounds and that whole situation.
Well, your imagination is going in the right direction because we'll have some of the similar.
Okay, thank you.
So getting into today, last night, strong winds caused power outages for 30,000 PGE customers. So in addition to the 20,000, I should also mention, Chair Harrington, that you mentioned Forest Grove Light Power. West Oregon Electric also has I think 300 or 400 customers in the west side of our western side of Washington County. They are served by PGE. When PGE does their public safety power shutoffs, they lose power, so they're effectively within that PSPS for them. So county fire agencies are overwhelmed with response to structural and vegetation wildfire outbreaks throughout Monday and into this morning. Starting Tuesday around noon, there's a major wildfire near Hag Lake, 700 acres. Also a major fire in the West Hills has formed around the Forest Heights skyline area, 300 acres.
So can I come stay with you guys? Like,
All right, all the problems already. And both are expected to expand.
Restroom sheets are always clean.
thank you.
We've already established, you know.
Good partnership. So they're at this sort of immediate onset, first few hours of a substantial wildfire incident, level 3 evacuation orders in effect. Immediate evacuation order issued for both areas, and additional level 1 and 2 orders are expected. So level 3 is typical in response when you have these wildfire outbreaks. The fire agencies, or if there's time, the law enforcement, the sheriff's office will issue the immediate level 3 evacuation orders, which is level 3 is go now because of the advancing threat of a wildfire. Level 2, level 1 is on the other end of the spectrum, is basically just something a evacuation at level that says that there's wildfire activity in your area. There's just and it's really just an issue of awareness. We want to make sure that you are aware that there's wildfire risk and wildfire activity in your area. Evacuation level 2 basically says that there's active wildfire activity and you need to be prepared to leave right away in that due to the risks of wildfires. So that's the distinction. Usually, very often it's recommended in the level 2 is that if you may have difficulty, kind of like if you may have difficulty boarding the plane, you can board now. If you may have difficulty evacuating, or if you have assets like large animals and that kind of thing, the level 2 evacuation would be a good time to relocate. this point, though, in this immediate onset, we're just dealing with these immediate level 3 evacuation orders. Sure.
Some further, things on this scenario, if you could go back one slide.
Sure.
So it's interesting to me. So I'm going to assume that everywhere in the county, we were either on level 1 or level 2. So I'm assuming that the incident command center has already been on alert, at least, if not set up. This is why I need to describe this so you can decide what's part of the scenario or not. The other thing, you chose Tuesday. So I immediately went to 2 different forks. We have a board meeting and therefore we're all in the room, right? Because in 2020, that's when we were alerted of the fire. And I, right after the board meeting, went to Miss Angie and I said, because of the Napa stuff, get the fairgrounds open for the people and for all the animals. And I knew it was more than horses at that juncture. So there are 2 scenarios. One is we have a Tuesday meeting, so we're all here. Or another scenario is there was a decision made on Monday to either have our meeting hybrid or cancel it, right? Similar to recent ice storm times, and go from there. So which one would you like us to pick?
Why don't we say that you went ahead and had, proceeded with the board?
Okay.
All right.
Not hybrid.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess I could also throw that, again, this could be, well, what would you do? Or what would be the recommendation?
Oh,
Perhaps in terms of how to do that.
thank you. Let's think
Yeah.
that through. Because I'm having a little trouble going back to January. When we just had that ice storm, because I needed to leave for vacation a day early, but you ended up having we simplified.
If you were bringing back
Heaven knows.
memory, the agenda was reduced just to the emergency declaration. In the case that, if there's a case that we cannot have a meeting or convene for some reason, the county administrator can make decisions and later have the board ratify those decisions to let the public
I've
and the
also
board know.
learned from the sheriff that I can, as chair, declare an emergency and then go through.
So
the
there are
paths.
options. The county administrator would not on their own power just make decisions without consulting with individual board members. So
So
I know
I
you
think-
know that, but
Yeah, but I think since in the description of this scenario, since there was the first slide, right on my laptop, starting mid-August, it's been really active, air quality due to these conditions, and the power business as of Monday tells me, okay, we don't have reliable power, hence we're not going to have a virtual meeting, but we can usually still count on phone. And so we can have a telephonic meeting if necessary. And the other extraordinary thing was, it sounds like, for the sake of simplicity, the whole county's either at level 1 or level 2, which is something we haven't had to deal with yet. I would say we don't have a physical in-person meeting that day. And we're with our families and taking care of our families and on alert and reachable as needed.
I'm in on the level 1 and 2, so I did not work that into the scenario. That,
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, so, I think realistically at this point, again, what you've had up to this point are, like we had in the Labor Day wildfires overnight on the Labor Day itself, which is where there were just sort of brush fires everywhere. It was mayhem, but, and then a few, small number of fires who got that sort of expanded a little bit until we just had the two, Challen Mountain fire and the power line fire out east. But for example, in that situation, there was never sort of a region-wide level 1 or level 2. Those are generally going to be isolated to areas where you do have
Okay.
sort of that risk.
I
So,
get that from the official,
sure. Yeah.
but your last one, level 3, so Go Now, was issued for the Hag Lake area and the West Hills around Forest Heights Skyline area. Okay. So, the interesting thing about the Labor Day fire situation, not that immediate Monday, Tuesday, but later in the week with the significant smoke, it was everywhere in Washington County. And I think from a layperson's standpoint, given the experience that we've had through multiple ice episodes and that 2020 experience, there are a lot of folks that are going to have heightened awareness and be ready no matter what your officialdom is. So since you applied level 3 to those areas, I'm assuming that there were, I mean, I assume you could just do level 3 without going through 1 and 2, right? I mean, it's all, yeah, so that's where I'm hoping, I was hoping through the scenario that there's been some, because of the scenario description of August, not trying to complicate it, but trying to get into character, so to speak, that because it's been a really dry August from your prior slide, that it's like, okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I think this is a great amendment to or addition to the scenario here, which is we would definitely, up to this point in the public information realm, there would be lots of communications to the public about fire prevention measures that they need to take. No outdoor fires and burn bans. Those would all have happened up to this point. Especially with the smoke. So I think this would be on the public's radar. We will want to reinforce that, our communications team, fire agency communications folks, but we'd be really hammering that home, that we're in a period of heightened risk.
So in this scenario then, while it's been dry, while you've had all this public awareness, and the second bullet, there are outbreaks that you've been dealing with. It's really only as of Tuesday around noon, maybe because of under lightning strikes, that all of a sudden, boom, those two areas are affected. And they've gone to level 3, and you're expecting level 1 and 2 for other places.
Correct. Yeah. So, and this is sort of a typical sequence of events in the fire response. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But,
I know I may be overthinking it. I'm just trying to make sure.
But
I've transitioned from ice and trees and wind to
yeah,
under dry.
our imaginations on it. It's 40 degrees this morning. But it's very common that when you sort of have what they call the initial attack or the initial response, is there's the immediate, just the immediate activity is, hey, there's houses that are in the path of that fire. That's a level 3 area. Let's get those folks out of there. When the responders show up, then there's the process of usually that's led by the sheriff and deputies, where they say, okay, now that we have a better size of the scene, let's identify a level 2 and a level 1 perimeter. there's usually a little more time for that, which is why I have that happening later in the agenda. So that's.
So I'm one person who will never live in a rural area or on the urban fringe. I'm a core inside an urban area, but boy, with each one of the incidents we've had since 2019, I've heard from friends and constituents in all the areas. So that's where my imagination goes wild and, okay, what do I need to prepare for? What kind of questions might be incoming? I'm with you now, John. I think I got the assignment.
Great, excellent. Yeah, and great observations about, our wildfire risk. And there's work happening and work underway, obviously, through us and others to do education about how the public can reduce their wildfire risk, and then also about what we can do to manage vegetation and other wildfire risk. Yeah, Commissioner.
I have just a note here. I do live in Forest Heights, and just this last weekend, there were individuals canvassing the entire neighborhood with wildfire information, a meeting that's going to be held for preparations, all those types of things. So it's certainly, I think the awareness level is much higher than it was 5-10 years ago.
Absolutely, yes. Instigated, I think, largely by the Labor Day wildfires.
I agree.
62 and others have really created a lot of change here. So, well, good. So where we're at, just to sort of validate it in this incident, we'll consider that this incident really has escalated to a disaster with the outbreak of those two substantial fires. Issues of notification and warning, firefighting, evacuation, mass care, and then developing our incident organization. A quick summary of the fire EMS agency response. The fire EMS agencies will have implemented their emergency operations. That's basically where they start to prioritize their calls for service. They send a representative to dispatch, to WACA, to help dispatchers prioritize calls so that they can put their resources to where they're going to have the greatest effect. County fire agencies, though, in this situation will have exhausted their local mutual aid, and Fire Defense Board Chief would request state assistance request state assistance at this point, and the State Fire Marshal has invoked the Emergency Conflagration Act to support Washington County. Gaston Fire, for the two fires, I'll say that the Gaston Fire District and TVFNR chiefs delegate authority to incident management teams to manage those two fires. I guess I should add a realism note here, which is that that may not happen necessarily within the first 24 or even 48 hours. It takes a while for those resources to respond. So there may be a day or two when our local fire agencies need to hang on to the fire until they can sort of formally transition to these incident management teams that are assembled from fire agencies across the state to come in and do the large-scale management of wildfires, and also make it to where those fire agencies can still do their day-to-day, manage the day-to-day calls they get. But in general, like in Labor Day wildfires, limited resources, task forces, and crews. I know for a lot of the Labor Day wildfires, we only had like one aircraft that was available to support the two Washington County fires that we had back then. Other resources are en route. Alert and warning is something that my program would be involved in coordination with WACA. We would have issued the alerts for the PGE customers impacted by the public safety power shutoffs through the 9th and the 10th levels. And then we would have also issued alerts to the Hag Lake and Forest Heights skyline fires to about 4,200 people. I wanted to do a quick aside because this is an issue that often rises to the elected official level. It even rose as an issue that came up with the January winter weather that we have, which are these alert and warning systems. We have also coming out of Labor Day wildfires, we now have a statewide alert and warning system At the state level, it's called Or Alert. In the metro region, we use we brand it as public alerts because that's a term that we've been using in the region for several years now. But that is our alert and warning system. We have a partnership with WACA where WACA uses it on a day-to-day basis. We use it, our program will use it for larger scale incidents. It uses a vendor purchased contact database with like landlines and business lines. As you know, there's fewer people are using landlines these days. Community members can opt in to receive alerts to mobile devices and emails. Through our alert and warning system, we also have some special national level alert capabilities. One is called wireless emergency alerts, which basically think of it as a cell tower broadcast, meaning that if you're within the reach of that cell tower, and they're getting to where they can actually geographically isolate it. But if you're within the reach of that cell tower, you're going to get that alert. That's basically a box that we can check in our alert and warning system to allow us to use that capability. Through our warning system, we can also activate the emergency alert system, which sends the alert to television, cable, radio broadcasters as well. So the important thing to understand is that these alert and warning systems have their limitations, and we hear about these limitations both in other incidents and within our own jurisdiction, which is some things to mention. Support for alerts in multiple languages is a work in progress. We have decent support for Spanish language translated alerts. We are working towards where we in the coming months and years where we'll have full support for all of our safe harbor languages in the county, but we are not there yet. We only have 50,000 opt-in. So in a community of 600 and some thousand people, that's just a portion of our community that is able to get it where we can ensure that they're going to get that alert on their mobile device or on their email address. So the reality is that some in impacted areas will not receive the alert. Some outside of the impacted area will receive the alert. And so this is, again, sort of an area of continuous improvement, but I think just wanted to sort of brief you quickly on sort of the nature of these alert warning systems. I think you've probably heard in the Maui wildfires, and there have been other incidents where we've sort of really shown the limitations of these systems. They are very powerful, though. They give us a capability that we didn't have many years ago. But with that comes a lot of work that we got to do to make sure that they're going to work 100% of the time. Getting into evacuation, shelter, and mass care. So the sheriff's office, of course, is coordinating evacuations. Like I said, they would be the ones responsible for after that initial attack, setting the level 3, 2, and 1 zones, and then identifying the control points, the evacuation routes, and moving the people, going door to door, that kind of thing. Animal services and partners are supporting the animal evacuation. There's a shelter activated at the Wingspan Conference Center. RV parking and large animal shelter at the Fair Complex. An evacuation reception center activated at the Cedar Mill Library. Again, Red Cross resources are very limited, and we're looking at a shelter at the Falls and Hills Athletic Center. We actually have a great partnership in reality with THPRD for them to be able to support cooling centers, warming spaces, and shelters. They're actually doing a lot to develop their capabilities there.
Did get that congressional.
They did.
Oh, good.
Yeah, they got the congressionally directed funding to help them fund some improvements to their facilities. So, but a challenge in Washington County is that we'd be faced with, and that we and our mass care unit would be working on, would be the fact that there are just there can be fewer shelter locations available with school in session on September 10th and later. So challenges with that and with finding shelter staff. That's something that we struggle with. We do have, a good pool of volunteers, and we are continuing to build that pool of volunteers, drawing on Medical Reserve Corps and CERT and other volunteers that can help staff show. That's that we'll be working on.
John, do we have large tents, or does HPRD have large tents for setting up outdoor congregation centers? I'm just curious. I don't know that. And I'm thinking about some of the things we saw actually during COVID in New York and places like that.
Yeah. So we do, the county actually, Health and Human Services does own an acquisition of a tent, of a large tent. So that is a resource we have available. It takes about a day to
Get it up.
set it up. It is a fairly cumbersome resource. We do have state level resources. The Oregon Department of Human Services does have tenting systems that they have available that they're actually pretty substantial. So we do have the ability to do that. To the greatest extent possible, we do, want to use existing facilities.
Absolutely.
Obviously, tents themselves obviously create some logistical challenges, but however, we may need to use those certain situations. So we're prepared to do that. I wanted to also talk about sort of, given the evolution of this incident, how the incident organization would have developed. So this ADCC was emergency coordination was activated in Salem on August 25th. So they've been activated and supporting response for a while. Emergency management, our program would have activated what we call a severe weather response team on September 6th. This is a multi-agency group of people, cities, special districts, libraries, many others who we get together typically at 8:30 in the morning for a 30-minute briefing to provide situational awareness and to highlight the action plan for the incident. Emergency management activated the Emergency Operations Center on September 9th. So the day before this, in anticipation of the impacts of the public safety power shut off, and also the windstorm, that came in that we would have anticipated would have caused wildfires, the two that we saw. The county assembles a policy group on September 10th with representatives from CAO, Executive Leadership Team, Emergency Management, LUT, ATS, Housing Services, Sheriff's Office, and others. Again, for our practice in the past, where Tanya has pulled together a policy group in major incidents to coordinate the sort of operational response, and to make sure that we have a unified response to the internal needs of the county and other needs that might come up. With the EOC, when the EOC activates, we are always going to establish objectives for our response. This is what you would see as, I would anticipate you would see as our objectives for an incident. We would, again, provide alert and warning and emergency public information to the community. We would maintain situational awareness among all partners and stakeholders. That would include the board. We would be, as you've seen, we will get out email or our situation report briefing in a PDF or a Word document that would funnel up to you through Tanya or a delegate to keep you informed. We would, of course, our objective would be to support firefighting and evacuation efforts, coordinate shelter and mass care, and support community members impacted by extended power outages. So again, sort of as with my hat on as the emergency manager, we would activate the EOC. We would staff it, based around those business objectives for the EOC. So, long lead up. So, takes a little while to sort of tell the story here about sort of our first 48 hours or so of this incident. So let me pause there. What questions do you have about the response at this point? what do you see your role? I'll sort of throw out all the questions here. What do you see your role as at the stage of the incident? What information do you need, and what would be your priorities? You know, some of these we've talked about already, but
Question, because I don't know how to carry a learning from the heat dome experience forward to this scenario. After the heat dome experience in July of well, it was in June, but right at the beginning of July, the director of Oregon Health Authority and OHA and the director of Oregon Community Services held a town hall about the learnings from that heat dome response. And one of the learnings that was most impactful to me that they highlighted at the state level was that 211 was not 24/7. And the learning was that we need to modify our scenario plan to handle our vulnerable community members and our seniors in place. So we can't expect people who, for example, are on dialysis or needing to go for chemotherapy treatment or on oxygen at home to go to a shelter. We need to help them stay in shelter at home. Now, I understand there's a wildfire, right? But it taught me that what they talked about is, so from that, there was funding put in place right away to get 211 24/7. But as there were, we can't just assume that these two particular groups can use public transit. And then I can't remember, there may have been some impacts to transit at the time as well. So, so what questions do you have about the response up to this point? I don't know what to assume there are seniors who are living in their homes versus in congregate care facilities that don't have the benefit of long-term generators and whatnot. And so so that's a question that will come up for me. Holy smokes.
I think when you're talking about those scenarios, what comes to my mind is how do we deal with isolated people that don't have transportation opportunities during a wildfire type event?
Yeah.
So how does that evacuation work? I don't understand that.
yeah.
Isn't the evacuation burden, that may be too heavy of a word, on the individuals? And what happens to folks who are transit dependent or
Can't move.
yeah,
Absolutely.
mobility challenge? Yes.
Great line of discussion, and certainly something that I think you've also touched on an issue that is an area of current and future work, that we have to do to improve that capability. To fill in the scenario, I would say that, for example, with the public safety power shutoffs, what we, and actually public health, HHS will, and for instance, disability aging and veteran services are going to be working to reach out to people that are impacted by those power shutoffs to offer assistance, to provide services, information referral, and support.
So
And that,
for example, the health system Providence Health has vans that go around and deliver oxygen tanks and things of that nature. Do they get connected?
Yes, I mean, we would be in this scenario, especially where we're dealing with a substantial evacuation, an aspect of the scenario and the response that I can fill in is we would definitely be working that issue with our healthcare providers, coordinated care organizations, and others, subject matter experts that want to speak to this specifically. Adrian, right? Yeah.
While Adrian's coming to the table, the other point that I want to make is that the electric company, with my experience, had identified customers that had emergency needs
Yes.
on site. So if you had an at-home dialysis or something like that you had to be going through, the power company knows that as well.
So I
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
can add some subject matter expertise. Ignore my coat. I'm here in a public health capacity.
Now we all want to see your.
It's a mess. We're very important to. So what I'm looking at on my computer is what's called Empower. Empower is an HHS federal level tool that we have access to, which gives us all the information about all the people who have electricity dependent equipment in the community. I'm looking at de-identified, so I can see that there are a lot of people up in the hills. 229 in the 97229 zip code, to be specific. But in an emergency, we can request the identified data. So we have access to that. Now, many of them are connected with health systems, and there may be a resource, the resources do come together when we're in this kind of emergency, but we also are able to call and check on them and let them know. And so that's happened in the past when we've requested that Empower data. It's not a perfect system. We have to request from the state request from the feds. There's some stuff, but we actually just came back from a conference, and I am working with the state now to fast track that process, following a process that had been done in Utah and presented at the conference. So I'm excited about that.
Great.
There you go. And I should say, obviously, we do rely a lot on our public health emergency preparedness folks, obviously, to coordinate a lot of this issue of how we do reach out to vulnerable populations. There's a lot of threads to connect there between PGE, the responders on the ground, service providers that needs to be sorted out in terms of eligibility for certain services, Medicare and other things. So it's a bit of a complicated web, but it's something that public health works on.
Good to know it's
Really well.
there.
Yeah. I should say that, that since we're talking about a scenario that involves evacuation, is that's definitely a challenge of how do we marshal transportation resources, help people get out of area, particularly if they don't have access to a vehicle. Certainly, we would partner with TriMet, partner with non-emergency medical transport, and some of our homeless service providers. I know also have club vans and that kind of thing that can support that evacuation. So
We saw that in the Maui fires as well.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. That would be, you're touching on a great issue. I do want to say that what we're talking about here in our emergency operations center, this would be taking up a lot of bandwidth, and EEOs need to address that issue of how we're supporting both doing the notification and working on relocating those people and supporting people who are are also subject to power outages. Obviously, we experienced that in a big way with the January winter storm, where we had a lot of people without power for 5-6 days. So that's a major focus of what we'd be working on in the emergency operations center.
Which for me, on your third question, I assume we're doing the discussion now.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm on the third question. What information do you need? So as a board member, I have two first instincts. One is to stay out of the way. And the second first instinct is what information do I need to make sure people in the impacted areas have, or to put a finer point on it, what resources do they need to be connected with? So with regard to the evacuation, what site should they already be connected to, or alerts that they need to be connected to, so that if they or someone they know needs to be able to take advantage of those vans or buses or whatnot, or, you know, how do they get connected? And so that's one role. I want to make sure that I've done a good job of saying, look, people who are in these impacted zones, this is the place for you to be connected.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very much what I would expect. And we would try to funnel that information to you all and to our partners, both in terms of public information, you know, through a public information, you know, Philip and that team. But also, you know, through our emergency operations center, that would be information in our situation reports and in our information updates, you know, coming from our stakeholder partners, including to you. We definitely want to make sure that that word is getting out about where to go for, how to protect yourself, where to go for assistance and resources.
So commissioners, obviously I haven't had any problem diving in and asking questions from the discussion. How about the two of you that we haven't heard from yet at all?
Well, I'm not one of those two, but I have a question.
Go for it.
The, one of the things that I would like to see on here is, what would you expect of me as well? Not just what is my role? What can, where can we be of help by staying out of the way, one piece, but also where are the pieces that we can have input? The other question that
Before you move off of that one, can we turn to our trusted partner here, Ms. Angie, and say, okay, the most recent ice storm, how are we doing? You know, what has been your experience with us already? Have we been reaching out? What?
Oh, I was right in the center of
The
it.
zone, Commissioner Trees, you were in the zone. So,
Where's Stephen? Here he is.
so I guess that means Stephen and Ms. Angie were
Yes, I was-
received some information phone calls.
A few. So I think that's what's helpful. And on one of the initial slides where it talked the board's role in community and the voice to from on behalf of the community, what you're hearing. Like, so what are you hearing? What are maybe more informational needs that you need as a board? Maybe what are you hearing from the community in gaps in communication? So for you to be that community conduit back is incredibly helpful. With the most recent ice storm, and I'm just going to use Commissioner Treese as the example because your district was
Hard to get.
the hardest hit. The communication challenges the community was facing with getting the timely updates from PG was very helpful, and because that wasn't our communications, that was PGE, but then I could have that contact and John could have that contact and Stephen could have that so we were working it from multiple different areas. So take that to other events, and I know all the commissioners, I get several contacts, well, and that's helpful.
So, just post analysis of it, I'm the kind of person that does want to stay out of the way, but also wants to make sure that I'm prepared for questions and whatnot. So, Commissioner Treese and I spoke, and I was like, you don't have to ask through me, just ask. Here's what I know. We were talking about information, but since it was more directly in her district and she was in the zone as well, I was like, just keep me up to speed, but go direct. And so when PGE had communication that was coming just to me, I made sure that these two knew as well. So I think that's important to know because I'm not as quick, if my impression is I'm not as quick to dial as Commissioner Treese is. So, and these multiple incidents that we have, my first instinct is to just reach out and say, I'm here. Here's what I know. And if I hear anything, I'll be back in touch. But beyond that, I try to stay out of the way.
I'll also share one of the structural, just how we've restructured within Washington County and having John reporting directly to an ACA. I'm feeling more in touch with emergency management operations as the CAO. And so I think we've really fine-tuned our, oh, there's Erin Kelvin. She's hiding back there. I think
She's in my line of sight. No, she's not.
we've really fine-tuned some of our internal kind of management. What that's, the benefit is, we've all talked about Mr. Bransford's workload and communications, but for him to really focus just on communications instead of that connector for the emergency management operation. So internally, structurally, I think I'm satisfied with the ability to even get information out to the board faster on some of these incidents that we've been facing more frequently.
What was that whole ice storm and communications path like for you, Commissioner Woodley?
Well, because I was rescuing my son from her neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a little bit of that.
So you're
You
gonna
saw
be
what was
helping
going on.
him
Yeah.
and his family into your house.
Yeah. So it was interesting, I guess, the variety of issues that you dealt with as you drove around. And through your district, a couple of days later, I went down to Cedar Hills Boulevard and PGE had shut off because they were repairing lines. And so I wandered through the neighborhood. It was amazing how many streets were damaged in that T-block area. So, yeah, that, I guess that firsthand experience helped me to understand all of the variables in this. I think when it comes to snowstorms and things like that, I don't get quite the sense of urgency as I do a wildfire. Because as Maui demonstrated and as we've demonstrated, as was demonstrated in some of our fires in whatever that was 21 or whatever that was, they escalate rapidly. And so what is a warning zone 1 and 2 and quickly becomes a 3 and get out. So yeah, it's just that kind of, I guess, awareness of what it is. And then, as you indicated, there's our resources are fairly stretched. We've also experienced that California and Washington had some of the same things going on. What are some of the other outside, I guess, our region availability of support teams that we can bring in? You know, are the states all kind of in this communication queue at the same time? So I don't know, folks from Idaho or Utah or something like that coming in, and so everybody's on that communication.
Yeah, great comments, and working backwards. You know, in terms of resources available, I would say especially in the wildfire system, the wildfire area practice is that there's a very sophisticated and very well practiced mutual aid system that is national, even international. They're potentially, depending on how serious it is, but we have our fire agencies. Their partnerships have the ability to pull in fire agency, fire resources from across the nation if they need to. It's even been done again with other countries. We've helped out other countries, and other countries have helped out us. I believe some resources Oregon resources were sent to the Maui wildfires, for example. So especially in terms of wildfire resources. There's a sophisticated mutual aid nationwide, mutual aid network there. For all hazards resources, other types of resources, there's what's called the Emergency Management Assistance Compact. So there's a very specific mutual aid agreement that authorizes state to state mutual aid. I responded to Hurricane Katrina 2005 through the EMAC process. So there are systems in place there. I think, again, looking at the Labor Day example, which again come up here is again that even the regional mutual aid network was strained in that situation. So I always tell folks that we have unlimited resources available to us. The challenge is going to be is they may take a while to get here. The one thing I wanted to address in what you said, which is, I know it's off scenario here, but regarding the winter weather is I think you're right, which is these sort of fast acute incidents like wildfires can get on our radar more strongly sometimes than winter weather incidents. The January winter weather incident, is really in a lot of ways pretty unique incident in that way. And really challenging because it impacted our ability to respond. Land use and transportation, was really had a hard time doing a lot of the debris clearance because you had PGE lines wrapped up with debris, which led to a real hindrance to a lot of our restoration efforts in the county. So those incidents are challenging. Yeah, Mr. Trees.
And I would add to that the windstorm to me is a very different event than a snow event. And the windstorm, what happened there was we had a lot of people displaced as well. Trees going through homes. I mean, there were people having inability to find a place to go stay. So I'd put it underneath wildfires, yes, but above, a snowstorm type of situation. And I think Stephen Roberts' group did just an amazing job to be able to clear roads and work with PGE with the limited systems coordination that we had. But nonetheless, there were people that were stranded, and couldn't get out of their neighborhoods. We have people that work for our company, our county, that had that experience. So, I think that we need to be aware that winter weather isn't just a non-issue, and the whole windstorm piece for me really, really changed my attitude about the effects that we're going to be seeing into the future with weather changes that we didn't see previously.
So Commissioner Fine, Module 1 questions. What's your input?
Thank you, Chair. What I liked and appreciated and learned from your scenario and the materials that you provided is that I was able to walk through this hypothetical scenario with the incident response checklist that you provided for us. And I really, just remembering back to when my kids and I would run outside and it was pretty much dark, but it was 1 p.m. So reminiscing that and how this information would probably be really helpful to me as a community member. I wasn't elected then, 2020, but I really liked your information. So thank you so much for putting this together. I had a question about, and this is going to what information do I need to answer that question. I'm wondering if the scenarios you came out with in terms of slide number 15, there were dates that you provided. August 25 is there, September 6 is there. I understand this is hypothetical, but I'm wondering, just like you did in the material, the incident command org chart, the incident command or incident response checklist, is there incidents command or incidents response timeline that we could not? I know emergency, it's not easy to say, there's day 1, hour 1, minute 1, there's things that you're doing to respond to save lives, but is there sort of a zoomed out 50,000 foot level, view of a timeline that you could put together to say, this is what, to winding, to even the last day of how you wrap around things. From an elected perspective, but it's also will be really helpful to understand, like the community side of it. How do you wrap around?
So, and you're talking about sort of an incident timeline. This would be something that we, and there may be things like this, that you would get in advance, that would sort of identify what the steps are, in the process, that would, that you could expect, and it would give you sort of, going into an incident, and a sense of what that progression or that escalation would be. Is that what you're after?
Yeah, so for example, let me just clarify. So the hypothetical scenario started in mid-August.
Mhm.
And then your incident response, State of Emergency Coordination Center activated August 25th. So mid-August to August 25th, you pick that specific date. So that week, or I assume it's a week and a half or a week. So what's happening? Is that,
Yeah, and, for this scenario, not, the way I sort of laid it out is just to sort of say that starting in August, as we had this increased wildfire risk and a lot of wildfires in our surrounding neighborhood, not necessarily in Washington County. Other than smoke incidents occurring, there's not necessarily anything that not that much that we're responding to in Washington County until we get to this windstorm, that happened on the 9th and the 10th, which is part of this scenario. So I think kind of I think like you suggested there, it can be a little challenging to sort of provide sort of a set sequence of events that would apply to 100% of incidents, because it's, because like with the January winter weather incident, there are such unique aspects of any individual incident that can make that challenging. Generally, it's our standard practice is going to be we're going to hear about a hazard. There's going to be an assessment of that hazard. We're going to do what I would call some crisis planning to determine, within our leadership, within our emergency management partners, and with our leadership to determine, how do we organize ourselves to respond to that incident, and then our solutions is, like I mentioned, the severe weather response team. That tends to be sort of an early thing that we do, is we pull together our partners and start to do information sharing and briefings. We do more detailed assessments of the weather and that kind of thing. The state ECC also will generally do daily briefings. Once the state ECC is activated, they're doing daily briefings with the emergency management community. And then when an incident hits, that's when you see an incident command post for the fire agencies established. EOC is activated, in that situation. A lot of what you're talking about is encapsulated in our emergency operations plan. I mean, it's something that I can give some thought to as to whether there's some sort of standard guidelines that we can provide that would sort of get at what you're talking about, which is sort of a set sequence of events that would occur per incident. So we can look at that.
thank you. Yeah, it's
Okay.
So, I think that, it would really behoove us at this juncture to go through the module 2
Yeah.
and the module 3. The one informational question that I have at the moment is you, made sure, recently you made sure that we are aware that the Weather Service has modified their weather zones.
Oh, yeah.
It just so happens that that came after this most recent storm. So, but there are these more granular areas now for forecasts. The, one of the things that my personal perspective has changed as a result of the last 5 years of experience being on this job is wind. So I am assuming as we go through as we've been here in module 1 and you're setting up this scenario and going through module 2, that wind continues to be a factor in some places. And, wind is just wild. Yes, so for me, that's something that in terms of your questions about what information do we need, what are priorities, I think it goes back to that information resource because in my brain, I'm going to be thinking wind is a factor here. I need to respect that. And that's stressing not just community out, but that's going to be stressing all of you emergency management folks out because that's nothing that we can control or influence. But wow, is it a very significant variable in all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Related to power outages, debris, and to wildfire risk. Obviously, when we're in wildfire season, wind is such a huge factor, especially when we get to east wind events that happen later in the summer.
So what I still will wonder about as we go through each of these modules, while we've, at least the three of us have been on this job since 2019, we've been through the, oh, no, I guess I was a Metro counselor during the Gorge fire with the firecracker.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned, so I observed the Multnomah County Board of Commissioner involvement then, and then with the Clackamas County fires in 2021. So later on, I'll be wondering a little bit about that. So, okay, thank you.
All right. Excellent. Great. The last thing I did want to mention with my emergency management versus facilitator hat on was
I did have a question about the declaration.
yeah, the
Sorry.
disaster declaration is, I can tell you that what at least myself would be doing would be reaching out to, of course, Tanya and Brad to have a conversation about a declaration. And we would, I would likely recommend a declaration allowing us to bypass purchasing rules and possibly also personnel rules to allow us to hire people and more expeditiously like we did in COVID. That would be a conversation we'd have as well. And then we'll also perhaps looking at spending authorities and things like that. If the sheriff's office or LET, there's that.
Yeah, so as the chair, I am very comfortable with the staff policy group. And on that slide, I label it staff policy group. And I'm very comfortable with that because particularly at these beginning stages of an incident, we're very much in the, okay, what information do we need? What can we provide while staying out of the way? And what role do we need to make sure we provide? And this is where the recommendations are very powerful to help support the team. And I think we've been functioning as a great board in partnership with staff in this regard.
I also want to just clarify that word policy group. That's a customary emergency management structural word. That does not supersede any of the powers of the board, governance of the board.
Yeah, that's why I just inserted the word staff instead of that on the slides, because it's our slide.
Yeah, good.
If I may have just a quick addition related with emergency declaration and as CWS, as we examine our need in a situation like this, we will coordinate with our county partners and your board to also do the emergency declaration on CWS behalf. We are well aware that in a communication event like this, most of your attention and your effort should be focused on community-based areas.
If I looked back at my phone log from January, I was on the horn with Diane and asking questions and so forth along the way. So yeah, the system works.
We will try to make that an efficient process.
It is. It is.
You guys obviously have infrastructure that's impacted by, as a
I hear more about them mobilizing with, the 24/7 staff and, employees bringing in their RVs and just trying to make sure the system stays up and running and so forth. It's amazing.
Field operations.
Yep.
That's our concern.
Yep.
I don't know what went behind the scenes in terms of the last recent, the declaration process, but it was pretty smooth in my
Yeah.
experience. So kudos to you all. And I remember the chair called and Tanya called and when it was happening. We had a board meeting, so it was pretty smooth to all of you who did a lot of work behind the scenes. So thank you.
Thanks to COVID, Brad can do a disaster declaration.
Yeah, just touching on that, I think it was a Saturday, Saturday or Sunday, and in the morning, we connected as staff, and Brad said, I have some other plans, so do you think you'll need an emergency declaration? And we're like, no, we don't think so. And then just within a few short hours, the weather changed so quickly that it was, okay, we do, Brad, get back from your event. So I think Commissioner Fye, to your earlier question, the sequence, we can have a sequence. And yet with weather, things just change extremely quickly.
Well, I think that there's another point about the declaration as well. Yes, it allows the mobilization of opportunities for staff. It also sends a message to other governing bodies about what's going on where we are, both at the state level and other areas. So I think there's another important factor there as well.
So why don't we move on to module 2?
Okay.
Yeah, well, for module 2 is fairly simple scenario update. If you look at there, and again, our focus here is looking at employee health and safety and continuity of operations, just to talk through any issues or questions you might have about that. So we're advancing our scheduled 2 days, 3 days here. Level 3 evacuation areas have been expanded. Substantial level 1 and 2 evacuation areas added around both major fires. 11,500 community members within level 1 and 1 to 3 evacuation zones. Again, this is, as I mentioned earlier, this is sort of what you'd expect as the incident evolves, is we would have better defined evacuation zones. And then wildfire risks remain elevated, red flag warnings in effect. So the reality to us in the county is that the wildfire has destroyed neighborhoods and damaged infrastructure. So impacts to county employees, facilities, and services have been experienced. Scoggins Valley Park is of course closed and evacuated. Walnut Street Center is closed due to being included in a level 2 evacuation area. We have employees that are missing, injured and missing. Employees are evacuees and some lost their homes as well. So, and then just to add a little bit to the story here is the DEQ has issued an air quality advisory for the Portland metro region with the AQI or the air quality index values to 250 to 350. Just so you know, today, right now, they're probably around 20 or something like that. So that's a substantial increase and very unhealthy to hazardous air quality. So we're on the maroon hazardous air quality, to where the air quality is potentially hazardous to anybody there. It requires the activation of clean air centers and closures of facilities without adequate filtration.
The most disturbing thing in there is the employees are injured and missing.
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that becomes our substantial priority for the county.
And the interesting thing, you talk about the air quality, again, remembering back, our air quality deteriorated very rapidly. I was telling Pam that I was actually playing golf, and I don't know, the index must have been 150, but it didn't start that way.
Mhm.
Literally in a period of about 4 hours, it became that way. I mean, that was my feeling anyways, as I was getting out of that. But so yeah, that's kind of one of those things when we have, that wasn't a wind index, or that was stagnation. So yeah, and it doesn't apply to this. I'm just remembering back how that air quality issue that we dealt with for several days, how that just settled in on us. And so anyway, yeah, it was very interesting how quickly that.
Yeah. We had the worst air quality on the planet, I believe, for a period of time, where in the AQI and some of the metro region got up to 4 or 5 graders, which is pretty, something very rare, probably a once in a lifetime event. Knock on wood, hopefully for that. But yeah, very, very serious.
Question?
Mhm.
Sorry, I may have missed the answer to this question as I was out of the room. Walnut Street Center closed to being included in level 2 evacuation area and then employee complication. So this is an experience we've not had yet. Because Walnut Street Center is where we have all of our LUT, heavy equipment. So what does it mean that the Walnut Street Center is closed? Has that equipment just been moved? Has the deployment of that team been moved to another location, or are we up the creek? Stephen, I think Ms. Angie may. What does this mean to you, Director Roberts? What do I need to know as a board member about what that means? Because it's unfamiliar territory.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think I would have been on the phone with my friend Jack here, probably our friends at Clean Water Services, looking for some support to potentially relocate some equipment temporarily. We think there could be options at the fairgrounds or other places where we could store equipment. We actually have a pretty robust collaborative public works agencies agreement in place, and we meet with our partner cities pretty regularly. So we always are ready to pitch in and help out when another agency needs support and assistance. So we would activate that network, and I think we have some options where we would be able to stage equipment and our personnel if we needed to.
To add,
Did you guys go over that before, or did I just, okay.
to add on to that, to maybe a finer detail, we would also be working with those agencies to have access to their fleet repair areas as well. So it's not just storage. If Walnut Street closes, we would have to relocate fleet repaired.
Yep. And I assume that you have the means working as I know from RDPO days with major businesses who have big parking lots that they may offer you the opportunity to cite some vehicles because I don't want us to be in a situation of overusing the West Side Commons when we know there's going to be, from the description of module 2, an even larger community response need. So I'm just making the assumptions that just like with the electricity dependent equipment, that magic, emergency management magic happens for that.
During the last storm, there were a lot of trucks at West TV School along where Leahy is and where a lot of damage was as well. And they weren't just ours. They were from a variety of others, but the school parking area was full.
So do you think I understand what Walnut Street Center closed means? Because that was new to me.
I think your question is the impact of Walnut Street closing. Yes, I think you understand.
You just saw a little panic on my face. Sorry to explain, to help everyone know what just happened. Walnut Street Center and the Law Enforcement Center aren't very far apart. So I've had the luxury of thinking, okay, it's situated where it is, pretty central. I did read ahead on the assignment.
That's okay.
You read the end of the book? Is that where you're?
Yeah,
Just facilitate.
I'm bad about that. But, so, I'm immersed in this scenario, folks. This is what I do. So now my brain's thinking, oh dear, what about your ability to have the EOC at the LEC and whew, this is really super bad. I'm in the moment here.
Yeah.
Module 2 is really super bad. I get it.
Well, my scenario worked as a facilitator, but as an emergency manager, life just more complicated. So,
Okay.
yeah,
He's dealing with it a little more gracefully than I am. at the
and
moment.
that's where our offices are. Too, but we'd be in the LEC, EOC, at this point.
So what
So,
you
but-
don't see is I'm at home. I've had my oh dear moments and I've pulled out a sheet of paper and I've written out different scenarios and questions that I have. And I'm on the phone with Ms. Angie.
So I think also with advancements to technology, remember if the EOC is impacted, the physical location, we can always go to the virtual EOC and or there's other locations that can be used. If your question
How do you
was,
do that when you don't have power?
I'll let John answer that. That's a challenge.
Or the employees have to evacuate.
This is why we didn't do earthquake scenario.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole.
Because the
Yeah, it is.
complications. Got it. Okay, I'm with you.
But I mean, this is sort of what I wanted to get at with this scenario, inject, for this. And for full disclosure, the Walnut Street Center is not, nor is LEC in a wildfire prone area, but, just picked on the Walnut Street Center, just makes this life more, yeah, I guess my life.
Got my attention.
But obviously just to sort of provoke these kinds of thoughts around, well, what does this mean to us? And how are we responding to that? And as Stephen mentioned, there is capability there to be able to, relocate. The other thing I'd say is that, we would be connected to our fire agencies. Obviously, they're going to know that the Walnut Street Center is there. It's a valuable resource to us, and that may influence their priorities and protection strategies as well. Let me move us on to the next part of this, because this also feeds into this discussion, is an evolved capability that the county has in what we call our internal operations management team. So this is the county's operational focal point for solving internal cross-departmental challenges in response to disruptive emergencies affecting daily operations. So this is really a group that's designed to make sure we have a one Washington County unified and coordinated approach to things like the Walnut Street Center being evacuated and shut down. It's led by the ACA overseeing the ITS, HR, and FFP functions there. That'll be Ann's new ACA's role. And currently Erin she's the co-IOMT manager currently. If something bad happened today, she'd be on hot seat as the leader of the internal operations management team. But and again, we would have representatives. I think in my mind, it's primarily sort of the HR, ITS facilities folks that are participating in that group that can help Stephen and his team do that problem solving around, okay, we've got this facility that's out of service. What do we do to make sure that we can continue the critical operations? How long is it going to be out of service? Do we need to identify other facilities to roll into? IT can help out with, facilities can help out with the power issue. IT can help out with the technology issues. And that basically sort of unifies our approach and makes sure to really mobilize the county to respond to really not just issues like with Walnut Street Center, but also I think the issues with, again, like I mentioned in this rather gloomy scenario where we have employees that are injured and missing. How do we support our employees? So the IMT is a very operational group. It's meant to, tie all those resources together here. Again, a short module in terms of scenario updates for you, but still roughly the same question. This is what questions do you have about this element? What do you see as any changes to your role or re-envisioning of your role at this stage of the information incident? What info do you need? What would be your priorities? in this situation.
I think for me it will be the health and the safety of the employees. So I guess like employees are missing and injured. Would the role be able, I don't know how not a declaration of an emergency, but sort of suspend some rules in terms of employees to try to figure out how we can be an environment that, you know, protects the employees. So how do we center in this incident that while we deal with the emergency out in the community, we're also going to internally focus and do our own deployment of incident management so that employees, you know, whether the trauma associated, that, you know, people are friends, people have best friends, right? So I think how do we do that would be the focus for me.
Yeah.
The priority together, you know, not saying one is outweighs the other.
Absolutely. And again, that's really, I think, where we all can look to that internal operations management team, maybe centered around HR to a certain extent, and just the supervisors, managers, and directors around the county to make sure that we are really focusing on that. Obviously, in order to be able to respond to meet the needs of the community, the county needs to meet its own, it needs to make sure that its own workforce and its own resources and assets are cared for. And we'll need to balance that priority against priorities of the community. So that in this situation, the EOC is going to be very much focused probably primarily on the community, on the external, the evacuation, alert warning, shelter, mass care. However, that internal operations management team is going to be our customer as well. And we are going to be ready to support them with whatever resources that they need for that effort. So that'll the sort of another function of that IOMT is it allows us to sort of split off, you know, that internal focus from that external focus for this. But it's, I mean, it's helpful to hear, and certainly I agree that that would become a very high priority for us is how we're going to care for our employees, adjust rules and policies if we need to.
When I think what our role is at this stage of the incident, it really rolls back to the module 1 as well. But I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders to make sure that we are calmly talking to the public, making sure that we are making all of our communities, internal and external, feel as comfortable as possible as we move through this, and providing information and pointing people into the right direction to get information. But I feel very strongly that that's an important piece of our leadership here. It is to not make things worse, but to make sure that we are talking about the strengths of the county in relationship to the preparedness in a disaster situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
So do we have a hierarchy or a protocol for staff reporting in to their supervisors during this, so we know if they're missing or injured or even involved in this?
So I see county counsel shaking his head. Could you please take us through this?
County. So,
Either don't shake your head and let somebody and answer. Well, either shake your head and answer it, or
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think every individual department has a plan. I know our office has a plan for what we would do in this scenario.
so
Yeah.
can we take your do you to what is?
Yeah, and I do think that as part of our continuity of operations plan and just departmental level plans, is their departments do have systems and processes for employee accountability to make sure that their employees are checking in with them. The other thing is we do, you know, I mentioned our alert and warning system, Everbridge. That is actually also a system that we've tested using it for employee accountability as well too. So that's actually an automated system that it will allow us to do an outreach to employees. They can use that to report in, about their safety, their ability to report to work and that kind of thing. So there's additional, in terms of the county's continuity of operations plan, I'll just be transparent about it. There's more work that we need to do here, I think, to make sure that we're consistent across the county, to make sure that we can do employee accountability and have that really roll up to Tanya and leadership. So we can really rapidly get kind of a full picture on the status of our employees and our status. But I know our departments though do have that capability in place to be able to assess their employees.
Emergency management effort right now with all of Washington County to ensure that continuity of operation plans, also called COOP, are updated across the county. And so this will help put just a finer point on the notification call down. I will share just within the last few weeks when this building had to be locked down, there was fast response just within the building, checking on employees who were in the building. And I know the chair moved offices and we didn't know where the chair was. So making sure the chair was okay. So I think those.
We lost the chair?
Those, because in a prior one of these lockdowns, I didn't see the notification on my phone. And I had a field meeting and I walked right out to my car in the middle of a site lockdown that was very appropriate. So when I got to my car and saw it, I was like, "Ooh." So now I get them by email and text, so.
Perfect.
Tanya, you lost the chair.
Nope, we found her. She was in Aaron Doyle's office. Yep, and her response was, "Oh, you were looking for me? I'm right here."
I don't have an air tag.
No.
The chair is emergency prepared.
Well, I just share that as an example of the care, and that was just what was occurring within CAO. It was occurring throughout this entire building.
Oh,
Yeah.
I decided to go last. For me, one thing I've learned while chair is loss of life changes everything. Also, I've learned by virtue of unfortunate, well, they're all unfortunate, but unanticipated deaths of employees by both organizations. I've had an experience that I assume is applicable to both organizations. Warning light, I assume. So, you talked about employee continuity of operations, and so my basic assumption is we're all public servants, and even if my job isn't essential for keeping daily services going, as a public employee, I may need to be deployed somewhere within the organization to help support and keep things going. But some of these instances, whether it's by virtue of their ordinary assignment and how an employee would be deployed in a scenario like this, or in a special assignment, my label, our life insurance policy, once you hit the age of 65, it's private market based and our lives are lower due to actuarial tables. Automatically you hit that date. So for the default life insurance that we get for commissioners who are 65 or older, it isn't your full salary. And I don't know how aware our policy statements to our employees make that clear. Yeah, I think that is something that by virtue of this, going through this module, I've had the learning that I need to ask about that, both for non-emergency and emergency scenarios. Um, Yeah, yeah. So I just think it says something to our employees that the benefit says the standard policy is either 1.5 or 1 point something of your salary. And anyway, there you go. So the last thing in relative to your questions. So sorry, I need to turn my page because I wrote the note over here. In both of the major fire incidents that I was exposed to, the Multnomah County Gorge Fire, that Multnomah County does go out into the gorge, and we had, this is when I was a Metro counselor, and we had not only property that Metro owns out there, but also employees that lived out there, some of whom had animals, you know, goats and horses. And a lot of those areas were on levels 1, 2, or 3 and needed to evacuate. So there was seeing how the Board of Commissioners had some presence to first make sure that the community knew this was serious. So don't ignore these level situations. But then once there were these level 3s, and soon after the incident, they also had presence to, I'm talking about physical. The board was seen with the emergency experts in the field as a means to increase awareness that it was a resource focus, that there are resources here, get connected, and also there are next steps as part of this response and recovery. Similarly, but different, was with the Clackamas County fires with the Labor Day time, right? And the threat for them, it took a while with those fires. And so there was some presence that I only observed from far away. So part of what, with this module at this stage of the game, I think it's important for us to know we may have to serve a role. It's one of those during the time you've got to figure it out. But I just wanted to make sure that it somehow gets noted for future boards that, especially in this stage, your physical presence may be beneficial, but keep working it with the CAO and the emergency management. I have confidence in the state of our organization for us to go through that and help play a positive role. So I don't have something concrete in mind, but the way this module is defined and based upon that experience, it's just a role that I can't better describe at this stage.
That idea triggers a thought in my mind, which is that at this stage of an incident, for the wildfire impacted communities here, is that the fire agency, the incident management team, working with the county, would be conducting they would be conducting community meetings for this. They would be opening up a nearby community center, pulling everybody in, and there would be the incident commander would get up and say a few words, and I might get up and say a few words, and you might be invited to get up and say a few words too. And that's obviously extremely important presence to that community that's impacted within the level 1, 2, and 3 evacuation areas. There will be that definitely in just about every wildfire I've heard about. They do those community meetings, and that's part of the process and a place where you all can have a presence
And that was something as a Metro counselor at the time I learned from employee feedback. That it was beneficial for them to see the elected officials present, just as a reassurance that yes, we as individuals have gone through this terrible thing, and just knowing that you're aware on top of supporting this whole transition is important, which is something that has stayed with me. Certainly, a part of that post support to employees was something that I hadn't anticipated learning.
Right. Right, other thoughts on this module? I was gonna suggest a break, at this point before we get into module 2,
3, you mean?
excuse me, module 3, 2.5, yeah. So, shall we do 10 minutes or what's the?
Sounds great. Terrific.
We are fairly, short on time. That's okay. Obviously, the discussion's been outstanding. So thank you very much for that. But we will look to expedite through the third module. So stay tuned. All right.
Terrific. Thank you. See you at 11:15. Okay.
Great.
Welcome back, commissioners.
I gotta get some water. Can we
Okay.
have one more minute?
Yes, 1 more minute on the clock of break time.
Uh-oh, John, you're competing with growling tummies. Oh, no.
Mine has been known to really do it.
So,
You're out.
if I might, John, before we dive into module 3, one of the things that Jack and I were talking, and there are a couple of things with regard to clean water services learning. Jack, could you speak to the pump stations?
Yes, so from a clean water services perspective, one of our priority in a situation like this is continuity of operations. And we actually do have pump stations that are a little further west in the rural areas. And if there is a fire emergency evacuation, our concern is accessibility to the pump stations out there. We do have emergency operations plans for the continued operation of those pump stations in a powerless situation. If power goes out, we do have generators. Those generators needs to be refueled on a periodic basis. If we're not able to access those pump stations, it will be potentially a problem. So we need to take that back to our emergency operations and coordinate with the county and think about the ways for us to continue those services out there. So that's
Absolutely, and the county or the county EOC can facilitate a process to help with issues of access and working with incident command and the sheriff's office to be able to do that. It's a great point, which is obviously there's other infrastructure in addition to CWS infrastructure with the ADJOURNMENT helps with the water, WACA has towers, things like that. So that would be an issue that we could support or make connections with to help facilitate access.
And the other thing that I wanted to highlight as part of module 2 isn't so much wildfire specific, but when we had the declaration on COVID in March of 2020, we remember back then we didn't know about what the transfer of COVID was. And so Diane asked me to meet with the utility operations team and to hear their questions as we were continuing to learn more about how to support our employees and ensure that they knew that we had our humanity front and center in supporting our employees. So just like the physical presence of the board that I was talking about with the wildfire, our management team will turn to us and seek our support in order to support employees in ways that we may not know right now, but we are a really good board and we have great management team and employees at all levels. And so I've been thinking about, okay, how do we memorialize things, so to speak, so that with future boards, if it's not as good and tight, that we have onboarding so that they know, those next future board members know this is how to really be a good board member through these unknowns and even with that, those spontaneous, needs.
In some of those things, well, Chair, I agree 100%. I think that what makes us a cohesive board is that if, for example, in that situation, we all agreed to follow the science.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure that we can protect the future election process from not having people who follow the science or whatever. So I just put that out as a caveat. And I think that, but having it memorialized that that was what occurred and how we did have a cohesive front there is really important.
Yeah. And we've had a lot of emergency experience together through 2020, 2021, and now 2024. Common experience has really helped.
100% agree.
So on to module 3.
Great, excellent, thank you. So module 3 is a little bit of a shift in the nature of the response as we get into recovery. So today is Saturday, September 23, so moved 10 days out. The two fires are in the mop-up phase with limited 1 and 2 evacuation orders in effect. So the level 3s have been terminated, but just precautionary level 1s and 2s in effect. Large areas in and around the boundaries of both fires are not habitable. Substantial impacts to buildings, infrastructure, water, wastewater, power, communications, roads, etc., agriculture, businesses, natural areas. 86 homes destroyed, 120 homes with damage. 70 people remain in shelters. We'll need to consider long-term non-congregate shelter solutions potentially. So,
Can I ask?
Yeah, go for it.
It's amazing to be reminded about humanity. And these are people and families we're talking about. And I remind myself every single day that that's what our work is. I need a little bit of scale expertise from you, John. With, for example, the ice storm and the windstorm, how many, I mean, I've seen horrific pictures, I've done drive-bys, but I don't know how many approximately, how many homes had downed trees, and then melting snow and rain. What 86 sounds like a lot, but 120 sounds like a lot.
So do we have data on the last storm? And that would be interesting to be able to project what futures.
What it feel, it tells me what does this scale feel like. So that's part of what I don't know for example, how many homes are in Oak Hills? Does anybody know? Or in the Cedar Hills neighborhood? 100?
Oh, at least in Oak Hills.
Yeah. So, wow, imagine that whole neighborhood. Poof. I know it's different. They'll be isolated and whatnot, but
I can tell you driving around my neighborhood, right off the top of my head, I can call out 15 blue tarps on top of houses right now.
And I'll explain that, in terms of that identification of, number of houses destroyed, damaged, major minor impacts. In this wildfire scenario, and an incident of this scale, we would have pretty good data and would be able to get it through various means. For the winter storm and those types of incidents, I'll be honest, we don't have that data other than through, things like the information that Commissioner Treese just shared. And that's because we're not, a lot of that is driven by the federal disaster assistance process and the determination threshold for assistance to individuals and homeowners is pretty high. So the determination at the state level was made not to request disaster assistance for individuals and homeowners for that. And as a result, we really don't have a good source of information, at least to my knowledge, around how we would identify the extent of the impacts. It's something that that actually is a project that we're making very good progress on, is how we capture that information through like a self-reporting process, where the public can go into an online portal just for the purposes of letting us know, hey, we had damage and here's how we would classify that damage. In other situations, we do have plans and procedures to work with, for instance, with A&T and others to do property assessments or do building assessments. So for this type of incident, we would have that information. For other types of incidents, again, we don't have a really good source of that. But I know that's getting kind of technical response to yours, which is again to really recognize that human, the realities of the impact to families. And again, 86 homes destroyed. Again, this is to spur this conversation.
Well, it does, it even triggers. With the Labor Day fires, we were having an AOC Board of Directors meeting when the Marion County Commissioners walked in the room, having just returned from their overhead flyby through the whole Detroit Lake area. And I don't ever want to have that experience. It was, and I was online. I was not one physically in the room, and I'm not one of them. And it was awful.
It was awful just to drive through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is a really good scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
But it also, through the course of my recent town hall, and I know Commissioner Treese has experienced this through CPO meetings, we are hearing frustration from constituents in the urban unincorporated areas. As you noted, the federal, presidential, and even state disaster has a high threshold. And we are a county government. Those are urban unincorporated areas. We do not have the city resources to have for example, they're wanting, I've heard the request, they're wanting us as a government to help them solve the fact that they have big trees that have come down on their private property, and they would like to do the sustainable thing and or just get these huge logs gone. But that isn't what our county public works is set up to do. And it's just a very tough situation. So part of what we know from the wildfires that we toured back in 2021, I think 2020, was that, yeah, insurance, government can't do everything. So that's one of the things I remind myself with Module 3.
Yeah. And that's what Module 3 obviously here is all about, is identifying those issues and figuring out what we can do in terms of resources or information referral connected to resources. So a few scenario injects I put in here. Community members have reached out to board members with offers of donated food, clothing, supplies, and other items, and have asked for drop-off locations. That would happen.
Yes.
On the 23rd, the county EOC deactivates. The county has been included in a presidential disaster declaration, making the county eligible for disaster assistance. Given the extent of the damage, we likely would be eligible for both assistance for public entities, government entities, and private nonprofits, in addition to assistance for individuals and homeowners in this situation. And so, other than here, the county administrator has appointed a disaster recovery manager and established a recovery policy group. Or transition to our policy, staff policy group to a recovery policy group. A countywide long-term recovery group. I'm sort of introducing some terminology here, so bear with me. Is being formed with members of jurisdictions, community-based organizations, community representatives. That is to the objective of wanting to support a holistic, whole community, collaborative effort to support what's going to be a long-term, potentially years-long recovery effort. And then the last and perhaps most important bullet point here is that disaster survivors are anxious to rebuild and recover. A quick aside, in just a few minutes we have left, and I know we need to wrap up, but is the
Well, don't.
yeah, we do, but want to leave time for discussion and wrap up and lunch. And I know I'm competing with lunch. But just for your awareness is the county is, our office is currently working on a disaster recovery framework. We have most of the support of a planning contractor using some federal grant funds to develop a recovery framework to start us on the process. Again, recovery planning is hard, but it starts us down this process of wanting to better organize and establish our priorities, our governance, and so on for how we will do recovery. I wanted to share just again, it's just in a draft format. It's the end of the project is the end of this month. But what we've established so far is that the vision is to build Washington County back more resilient, creating a community that is safe and equitable, where individuals, families can thrive and withstand future disasters. And then the sort of supporting element to that is the county seeks to balance responding to immediate needs and making decisions that align with long-term values and goals. And this sort of represents the challenge with disaster recovery is there has to be a balance between speed and expediency, and deliberation and proper planning. And so that's what that vision is oriented towards, providing those guideposts for how we recover. Sure.
I'm really impressed. Being the total geek that I am, when I was a Metro counselor, one of the smart growth conferences that I went to, which doesn't exist anymore, EPA stopped funding that sort of thing. I really focused on two things. I was the council policy and policy tech geek for Brownfield. So I went to some sessions on EPA Brownfield, learned a lot from those. But also went through the the disaster scenario sessions and learned a lot from areas of the country that have had frequent flooding. Learned a bunch from Iowa, and then also in sort of Hurricane Alley, and there was one county commissioner there where their particular area had been hit over the course of multiple years in a particular decade, multiple times. And so finally, the third time, there were a few families that said, or after the second time, they were like, we're not going to rebuild a third time. I learned a lot from each of them about working with community and how recovery requires patience. And while we have constituents that want to help them get back to normal, so to speak, as quickly as possible, it also does take a little time. And that's one reason why I think I've been 100% comfortable with our economic development recovery work here, and so comfortable in trusting the ARPA use, right? Just having the framework and not being concerned about having to understand what the details are in order to be able to handle constituent questions. I've been able to stay, I feel, high enough level to convey that, yes, the team has brought information resources to bear. Here's how you get connected with that, and really trust staff with this. So I just feel it's helped. So I'm really impressed.
Stephen and I just talked about this morning. Part of this recovery framework, I think, also includes our permitting processes and what we do to help people rebuild. I just got an email yesterday from a constituent who is waiting for permitting to be able to do work. They're not living in their house. They want to get back into their house. And so
It's April now
Yes.
versus
January. And during the storm, the same person contacted me, and Stephen and I worked through this, that because a tree had fallen, but the tree was in the easement, and there was a lot of question about responsibility, all these types of things. But our department worked closely with her, but I think part of recovery, as we talk about this, is how do we streamline as much as possible what the processes are for those who experienced this disaster and their need to rebuild and get back into their homes. And I just made a list of 8 people that I know personally who are no longer living in their homes, who are rebuilding. And that's just people I know.
Yeah.
And that's going to have an impact on our LUT group as well. The permits that were not planned for, not expected, and it's additional work. So how does that fit into our disaster recovery focus?
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate it. I mean, obviously this is just the conversation I'd hope to provoke here to a certain extent, which is this dynamic. I mean, between, again, the urgency and getting back to normal and dealing with these but also doing it responsibly and doing as much as we can to support the community through obviously a pretty difficult time.
And doing the best we can to not be an obstacle to them as they're working through this. And I say that knowing that our department is not doing that, but the perception on the other side is what we need to be dealing with.
Right. We'll get right into, we'll take our discussion and get right into the discussion here in modules for module 3. You can ignore where it says breakout discussion. We've had lots of great conversations so far this morning on modules 1 and 2. We can do this as a group here to work through these, but so just interested in continuing this. What questions did you have about the community support recovery process or information you need? What do you see your role as being? I added a couple of other specific things for this module just to get your reaction, but what are strategies to focus community empathy for disaster survivors and build community morale? Any thoughts on that? Also, would you have any, I'm sort of imagining that Tanya has hired this or appointed this disaster recovery manager. So what would be their priorities for that person? What would be your priorities for them in the short term or intermediate or long term? I think you can somewhat.
Well, let's do it.
Sure.
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
Let's dive into it. We're doing our breakout. We're breakout of 4.
Yeah. Perfect.
So, I'll just start priming the pump here. And I really appreciate Commissioner Treese bringing up that recent example. Because, there is, even with COVID, we have some folks who have wanted us to stay in special recovery mode, as though it will never end. And it's like, no, we're past that now. But also with the permitting, I think there is some period of time where, like, I'll just pull a number out of the air, 12 months, 1 year, where, I'm just gonna be hypothetical here with permits, where I would hope that we would give some priority to those rebuilding folks ahead of the greenfield development, right? Which may make hypothetically HBA, Home Building Association, mad at me. But it's only for a short period of time. A year may sound like a lot, but it's really not, right? And it takes time for people to settle themselves, marshal their own financial resources, work with their insurance companies, find contractors that they're comfortable with to really get things going. So my pulling a year out of the air may not be long enough, okay? But I wanted to pull something out. So I don't know what the answers are, but that's the picture that I'm hopeful and comfortable that you'll all figure out moving ahead. As far as the disaster survivors and building community morale, two different things in my brain. I mean, the survivors, wow. It stays with them forever, no matter what the scenario is, right? And their loss. On the community morale standpoint, this is where going back to the CRF funding, and I proposed and the board supported what, for lack of a better phrase, I coined community psyche. Because of the early days, remember, the funding was approved in April, we had to spend it out by December. And in the early weeks of COVID, I was hearing through my efforts to be informed about people being fearful about going out of their homes. So I thought through scenario planner. I was thinking through different scenarios. How can we make sure people aren't afraid to participate as a community? So our board dedicated over $1 million of CRF funding to be provided out to cities and park districts to plan events. And they did beautifully, absolutely beautifully. And so I really applaud the board experience in supporting that, because some of those events continued years later. There were the decorating your car light parade in Tualatin is one I remember. With THPRD, they took the opportunity for some equity banner building as well, which they continued to use those as art installations as well years later. So it really surprised me that these weren't just once and done. Right? At the time, I was only thinking about how do we get community members back and comfortable through this. But the creativity, I was really impressed with how our local jurisdictional partners used that resource and brought it to life. So I don't know how, other than just sharing this antidote as a board member, I don't know how to memorialize that kind of idea so that future boards will automatically think of things. I mean, I really appreciate your putting community morale here.
I think tomorrow doing the photo shoot for the foundation check from PGE is part of that as well. That's the recognition that the community went through a difficult time, and a thank you from PGE to all of Washington County, to the library, but done at the West Slope Library where there was a lot of damage.
Yep.
So, I think that's where the community that's what the community will see and react, I believe, positively to.
Yes.
So, but I agree, Chair, that having that up there is a wonderful reminder that we need to be thinking about the healing process. And I think that that's what we're talking about here is how do we heal from a disaster?
And one thing, I applaud your questions here, but because of the way you defined module 2, employees are missing, employees are injured and missing. Employees are evacuees and some have lost their homes. So that third bullet, I've read it as community, but I also need the fourth bullet about our own employees, right? And what it takes for our employees to get their own lives settled and back. I think, John, just having those questions here, I really appreciate how you've set up the modules, excuse me, to go through these phases. And how I want future boards to have that as part of their book and part of their first year onboarding to have the benefit of learning from our experiences in the hopes that they'll never go through this ever.
Yeah, and a couple of thoughts, and I appreciate sort of the theme throughout of how we prepare future boards. And again, it may skip there, you know, the next generation might have a quiet time, but then the generation after that may have a busier time. Is that we can look at solutions like the, well, number one, in this discussion, our recovery framework, which is going to be an evolving document. We're going to finish the project and by this month, but that's definitely going to be a vehicle for us to memorialize the role of elected officials and board in the recovery process, and to make sure that we sort of formally carve out a role, or at least a checklist of things to think about, you know, like this discussion. We can also, again, look at we've tried to use the elected officials emergency operations guide as a vehicle as well to document that, and so that that's available to future board members.
So if I might put you on the spot, Commissioner Floyd, I went from a regional experience and perspective as Metro Counselor to a county specific one. You've gone from Mayor of Hillsborough further up to county-wide. As you think about this, both the experiences we've had, do you have any thoughts? They can be questions, right? About what to think about or what to be comfortable with. Oh, and if I could also explain, I've said many times over these years that I appreciate the maturity of our board. With the SHS, Metro Regional Housing Stakeholder Advisory Team, whole business, I went back and looked at the evolution of the Metro Council that I was on for 3 terms, 12 years, and how I was just the singular new district commissioner to that group of 7 when I first came in. And then we did have some change, but it wasn't anything like the change that the Metro Council has gone through since 2019. It's a very green board. And we're not. And it's one of the things that I think has helped us as a board and an organization to go through the cultural evolution, to go through all the foundation building that we're at. But that's why it's top of mind for me, thinking about future boards and how can we help make it smooth. So anyway, sorry, I wanted to give that context because it's why I thought about your experience versus my experience as a counterpoint.
Well, when I was reading the discussion questions here and the previous slide when they were talking about community members every up to board members who offers, what example that came to mind was when downtown Hillsborough had their fire, and then subsequently triplex or whatever it was also burns. They had two fairly significant fires at the same time, and the community did step in. The challenge of the disaster recovery manager would be to try and manage all the enthusiasm, because that's what I'm also on the board of the Hillsborough Community Foundation. We set up a fund for collecting that, but at the same time, a couple of the fire victims had set up the GoFundMe accounts, and so all of a sudden we had pockets of help all over the place, and some people got a lot more financial help than others did because they kind of came inside our little thing, and we raised quite a bit of money for this, but set up a GoFundMe account and then you come to the other, it's like got multiple venues. And so I don't know how we would begin to manage this when you're talking about 86 homes destroyed, 120 homes with damage, and 70 people in shelters. That's a pretty significant group to manage, and there'll be a lot of enthusiasm as to how we can go about doing that. So yeah, I guess that was more of a question than it was, I have a solution to that, but that would be a fairly significant effort.
I think good, feedback for the disaster recovery manager here, and certainly that would be an objective is to the extent that we can, through the county recovery organization, through the long-term recovery group, is try and have a unified strategy for how we do things like support the impacted persons, support donations of funding, and that kind of thing. Support people, getting back on their feet.
Yeah.
I think we'll have HR questions too.
Yeah.
So Chair Harrington, we have had Commissioner Rogers has been listening this whole time. So Commissioner Rogers, did you have any thoughts or comments?
Stephen?
He has been on, he's just been off camera.
Okay.
Prior to his health.
Okay, Commissioner Rogers, any thoughts?
Am I on now? I couldn't get on.
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. I tried to get on at least to have an appearance on screen, but I don't think you want to sit there and watch me sniffling and sneezing and all that. No, I think it's an excellent job, and I appreciate the focus was a particular type of disaster because we could obviously gravitate quickly to an earthquake, which these numbers would be very tiny in comparison. But John, I'm curious, and it's probably my oversight, and because I didn't hear it during the presentation, and my reading I didn't pick it up. Tell me how you coordinate with a lot of others. I mean, you've got everything from not only cities, but you got the National Guard, you got the state police, you've got other jurisdictions that are well outside our boundaries. How does all that work in these strategies, or is this simply meant to focus on our individual response?
Big question. This discussion today was obviously mostly focused on the county's response, but there are, as part of that national incident management system, very beginning, and part of state, local, federal emergency operations plans, there are pretty specific and regimented systems for that interagency coordination. Not to say that it's not a challenge, but at the state level, we rely on the Oregon Department of Emergency Management through their Emergency Coordination Center in Salem to facilitate that interagency coordination and that unity of effort. As mentioned, that's a substantial role of our county emergency operations center, is to make sure that we have appropriate integration that the left hand knows what the right hand is doing across the incident commanders that are managing the fire, the agencies that are involved in the mass care and shelter, and the other aspects of this. And then that's a system that reports all the way up to FEMA through FEMA Region 10 and their regional operations center and that kind of thing. I would also mention that as facilitated through the Regional Disaster Preparedness Organization, we also have pathways for regional, meaning Portland Metro Region coordination, both in terms of response and recovery through what we call multi-agency coordination groups, which are basically, I would call them kind of counterparts to the policy, to the staff policy committee, or the policy group, which is there to sort of coordinate information sharing and coordination. But we have a countywide multi-agency coordination group, a regional multi-agency coordination group that we can pull together to facilitate those discussions around information sharing and policy making and priorities, resource allocation, and that kind of thing. So I hope I didn't make it sound like that everything will be perfect in regard to all those emergency coordination issues, because
Because
definitely
everyone is
challenging.
situational.
Yeah, but I think just the reassurance I can provide is that we do have systems in place for that can be applied to both the response process and to this, for related to module 3, to the recovery process that we're talking about.
So if I could move to the
Yeah.
next slide, and as part of wrap up. So, you have helped us become better prepared than what we had when we joined in 2019. And, thank you very much for taking us on this multi-part journey that you have. And I hope that you have found it helpful and reassuring as well. So on these notebooks, so I know I need a tab 8, and I know we have some upstairs, but I have a section 8. Partly because of my role as the board, but also some of the experience. I have some parts I need to update. When COVID hit, I learned that despite the Washington County mayors bragging about how tight of a group they were, they didn't have a list of one another's contacts. I put it together and I've maintained it since. And I keep a copy I have one of these at work and a copy of it at home. The emergency notebook. So no matter where, like with the weather, I just pulled it off my shelf at home. So I have it with me. I've got my go bags and all of that. And it has other things like a hard copy of our charter and rules of procedure and whatnot. So, I just want to thank you and open it up as part of wrap up for the board members as well, before we sign off for lunch. Commissioner Treese?
Well, at the risk of sounding like a kiss up, I'm going to say that Chair Harrington, you have been a leader in focused disaster recovery since I've been on this board. And I think that it's your direction that we all benefit from in terms of the relationship that the board now has with our emergency management system. So I do appreciate that. And although you do continually make me feel guilty about the level of go bags and everything else that I don't have. But anyway, but anyway, and I look back at what we've been through, and the fact that we have gone through these exercises, the fact that we have the relationships established with our staff that are in this room, with our support people that are in this room, and Don, you as that point person makes my comfort level goes up dramatically. So I feel as confident as anyone can feel looking into the eyes of a potential disaster. And certainly that's what good preparation does for you, is to recognize where your strengths and weaknesses are and to recognize the importance of flexibility as we enter into these. I think about the days when we walked through the EOC during COVID. I think about the outreach that HHS made to the people that during the time that they couldn't leave their homes, and the food that was delivered and all that. It's been amazing. It really has. And I think we're the generation that has gone through a significant time of disaster. And I hope the next generation doesn't have the degree that we've been facing. And, maybe that is taunting the devil out there. But nonetheless, I do appreciate this work, and think that it brings great value to our community at large. And that's our ultimate purpose, is to serve the community to our best ability. So thanks.
Thank you.
John,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Great work. Thank you for preparing me to be prepared.
All right.
Job well done.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, this is great. This is good information.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Again, this has been a very helpful. Obviously, we've got lots of takeaways from this. Again, I think it's clear to me that the board has a really good understanding of its roles and responsibilities, and I think we've added some depth and nuance to that today. And it's really helpful. I know, at least for me, and probably for a lot of other folks in the room, to hear your perspectives on what your interest, your priorities are, if we are confronted with a wildfire or any other type of incident. So these discussions are just extremely valuable to us. I think if we have an incident tomorrow, again, knock on wood here, but that this will really have dividends when we have that. So
Commissioner Treeks you don't make me. I feel guilty that I haven't kept up my certification.
Oh my God.
So just wanted to share that back.
And John, if a disaster happens tomorrow, as alluding to, you can rest assured that I'll still be calling you, even though you
All right.
have this information.
doors always open.
So this is the draft. So when is this going to become final?
Ms. Angie's going to let us know.
Yeah.
Okay, because this is a great document. Because after I asked you the question about assistance from outside the region, then I went back into here and saw the mutual aid. There's 2 or 3 pages of mutual aid information in here. So I should have.
Absolutely. We've tried
Yeah.
to make that one-stop shop. And again,
Our
there's
responsibility to be,
Mhm.
to have read this, familiarize ourselves with it. I'll write that down. Okay,
Just ask me
great.
to
We are adjourned until
books.
1 o'clock. See you then.
Want